How's it going, everyone? It is Drago. We're back with another character discussion video. This time we're going to focus on Gray Fullbuster, Fairy Tail's very own Ice Make Wizard. So like the other videos, I'm going to section this into parts. First part just being kind of general backstory, not like every detail, but most of the best moments that Gray has accomplished throughout the story. Then go into like the teams he's been part of and like his relationship to each member in that team. And then finally ending on Gray's abilities. So let's start off with his backstory. I'm going to go chronological with this. So the first events that would happen to Gray that are like big milestones would be before the actual story even starts. So Gray's life pretty much began with just pure despair. When he was a kid, his hometown got ravaged by Deliora. This same event also killed his mother and father, which would be Silver Fullbuster and Mika Fullbuster, which Gray just got knocked unconscious from the destruction of his hometown, which he was later found by Ur and Leon. So they saved him, and then he eventually started learning Ice Make magic from Ur with the sole intention to defeat Deliora. And this is also when he developed his most key feature of stripping. So his blind hatred towards Deliora is what wanted him to go, and go kill him when he found out the location, but he found out he was not nearly powerful enough. And even though Ur said she would not help him, she did eventually go help him. And she ended up sacrificing her life to go save Gray and Leon by using the spell Iced Shell. Gray did take up her advice, and it was a passing line of her saying go west, like there's a bunch of stronger wizards there. So he did eventually go west, and going west is what led him to Fairy Tail, and he just ended up staying there. So that is the end of the prologue stuff. Now we actually get into the beginning of the story. He does show up a little bit in the beginning. He's not going to go save Ma Cow. The first time he really has a main presence and becomes a main character is during Eisenwald. And the true moment where he actually does become a main character is when Urza picks him to be on a team with her, along with Natsu and Lucy. Now, Gray doesn't do entirely too much during this arc. The main guy he defeats, I'm not really sure if anyone even says this guy's name in the story, but he's like the Egyptian looking guy that Gray fights during Eisenwald. But I did look up his name, Rael. Probably pronounced it wrong. Not gonna really entirely matter because out of everyone that Gray has defeated, Gray took this guy down pretty callously. Like he puts his hand on his face and just starts freezing his whole body. Otherwise, the most notable thing that Gray does during Eisenwald is he helps Natsu and Urza defeat Lullaby. And with that done, we move on to Galuna Island, which Galuna Island is very much Gray's arc. This is where you learn a majority of that prologue that I went into. So obviously, when we get to the prologue stuff, I'm just going to pass over that because we already went over it. So this arc starts off for Gray with him volunteering to take back Natsu, Happy, and Lucy because they took an S-Class quest. But as soon as he finds them, he immediately gets knocked out, and now he's part of that S-Class quest. So, they meet with the villagers and stuff, and they just start exploring the island, and they find the body of Deliora. And of course, this brings back many a bad memories for Gray. You can very much tell he's very disturbed by it. So as time goes on, Gray eventually finds and ends up fighting Leon. And Gray gets defeated in this fight, but he does end up back at the village, and when he recovers, Urza's there, and she's wanting to take them all in. And this is kind of one of the few times that Gray stood up to Urza, because both Gray and Natsu really don't want to stand up to her. Urza goes along with it. So Gray rejoins the fight, and Leon is fighting Natsu, and Gray joins up in that fight. And this is when Gray attempts to try and do Iced Shell, and Natsu stops him. And this is literally where you get the meme of anytime like Gray gets into a very difficult situation, he immediately goes for the suicide move, but Natsu always seems to stop him. As they're fighting, eventually Natsu leaves, so you get the full-on round 2 between Gray and Leon, with Gray eventually winning. At the end of this arc, Delior actually does get revived, and Gray attempts to do Ice Shell again, but Natsu again talks him out of it, which you get actually a really great moment at the end of this arc. Ur's Ice Shell wore down Delior so much to where he just immediately crumbles into pieces. So, Gray is like crying at the end of this arc, realizing that Ur yet again saved him again. Now we move on to Phantom Lord. So Gray's presence in this arc is dramatically reduced, mainly because that last arc was pretty much completely focused on him. He was part of the Fairy Tail raid on Phantom Lord, where they all just go raid their guild hall, which didn't end in much success after Makarov got poisoned and they had to bail out of there. Otherwise, his most notable fight in this, and probably one of the most notable people he meets throughout the series, is his fight with Juvia. So Gray does end up defeating Juvia, but the downside of it is he got her to fall in love with him, which is really weird to see Juvia be the villain, and especially her fighting Gray after we've had her around for so long, and that she's such a part of the guild now. So it is weird to see them be at odds, but it is the start of their love, this fight. Now we move on to the Tower of Heaven. Gray joins everyone on going to vacation, and on this vacation, Gray meets up with Juvia again, and they eventually get confronted by Simon, who does cast like a spell to look like he killed him, even though he didn't want to kill him, and they ended up being fine. Otherwise, later on in the arc, Gray fights Fukuru and saves Natsu from him. And then we go on to the Battle of Fairy Tail. So Gray is trying to save like the hostages from Loxus and the Thunder Legion, and he ends up fighting Bixalo, which he does end up getting trapped and tricked, and he gets defeated. Otherwise, as a less meaningful thing, he does help destroy the Thunder Palace. Now we go on to the Irration Sace, which Gray gets a little bit more of a spotlight in this arc. The past few arcs, he's kind of been relegated more to the sidelines, but now he actually gets some really good battles during this arc. Gray gets picked to represent Fairy Tail for an alliance between Blue Pegasus, Lamia Scale, and Kate Shelter, their end target being the Irration Sace. So they all meet up together, and this alliance gets taken out very quick. With the team recovered, Gray, he stops Leon from cutting off Urza's arm, and then they go search for Wendy. And on that search for Wendy, that's when they fight the Naked Mummy Guild and defeat the whole Dark Guild. So Natsu's getting chased down by Racer, and Gray helps him to escape. And this is the beginning of the Gray versus Racer fight, which after a little bit of time, Gray does eventually run into Leon. So it's Gray and Leon versus Racer, which this is a very cool tag team between the two students of Ur. It shows how each one of them is thinking up things on the spot, with Leon distracting Racer by thinking he's being arrogant and going to take him on solo, but in all actuality, he's setting up Gray to take him out with a bow and arrow shot. I wish Gray used that bow and arrow a lot more, because that move to take down Racer is a really, really cool move that he does. So skipping ahead quite a bit, Gray, Lucy, and Natsu get taken out by Zero, and they get defeated pretty much effortlessly. Gray is still alive, and he ends up taking out a Nirvana crystal. With that, we move on to Edelus. Gray got a little bit of a sideline at the beginning of this arc because he was frozen in a lacrima with Urza and eventually freed by Gajil. Gray does eventually fight Sugar Boy, and Sugar Boy had the key that they were needing at the time, and Gray creates an ice version of that key and, defeats Sugar Boy. Moving on to Tenro Island. Gray is selected to be in the S-Class trial, and he also picks Loki as his partner. Their first path that they go down in the S-Class trial is a battle, which is between them and Wendy and Mest, and Gray and Loki are the victors, and they didn't even really entirely take on Wendy. They just kind of got her to surrender because of like sour face. The trial does eventually get stopped, and Gray and Loki group up with Lucy and Kana, and they take on Capricorn, which is being controlled, but they eventually leave that battle just to Loki. So Gray follows and eventually talks with Ultir, and that eventually leads to a fight with Ultir, to where he learns Ultir's past, what happened with her being the daughter of Ur, and why did she abandon everything, which he eventually talks some sense into her and like makes her realize that she's wrong, and wins that fight. And it's a very cool way that he actually wins that fight by turning his ice, instead of his normal ice, he causes himself to bleed and he makes his blood ice. It's a pretty cool way that he won that fight, but pretty gross if you actually think about it. He's just like cutting himself open and making ice blades. So going into the finale of this arc, he is part of the battle against Hades, which they all do. They're equal parts with Urza, Wendy, Lucy, Natsu, and Gray himself, which they do eventually defeat Hades, but that victory very quickly gets thrown out the window when Acnologia shows up and decides to take on all of Fairy Tail, which they don't do much of anything, and they all just end up having to do Fairy Sphere to save themselves, thus causing the time skip. With the time skip, the team is eventually found, and Gray gets a second origin from Ultir while he's training for the Grand Magic Games. Which that perfectly segues into the Grand Magic Games. So Gray wins a spot in the preliminary round by defeating the Labyrinth, and is part of Fairy Tail Team A, which consists of Natsu, Lucy, Urza, and Elfman, and of course Gray. So Gray joins in on the very first game, which is hide and seek, and he gets ganged up on really badly. He loses this first game pretty badly as well. He's mainly targeted by Raventail and Sabretooth. That defeat for him made him very upset. So you're going to see Gray for a little while, but eventually after Raventail's disqualification, Gray is part of the only Fairy Tail team. Instead of there just being Fairy Tail Team A, Team B, they converted it to one team, which that team consists of Natsu, Gajeel, Urza, Loxus, and Gray, with Juvia eventually taking Natsu's spot. And the final game of the Grand Magic Games being a battle royale with all the teams fighting at once. Gray scores a few extra points for Team Fairy Tail in the final battle by taking out Hibiki, and Gray takes on Rufus from Sabretooth, with Gray winning the fight by overwhelming him with his magic. Just as a side note for future events that are about to happen, during the same time when he was in this battle royale during the Grand Magic Games, this was the moment that Silver realized Gray was still alive. So Gray and Juvia eventually do fight Shelia and Leon, and Gray and Juvia do a unison raid to defeat the other two. So Gray and the rest of Team Fairy Tail eventually do win the Grand Magic Games by standing together and Sting not bringing himself to actually be able to attack them, making Fairy Tail the #1 guild again. So Gray does eventually help everyone defeat the dragons that were summoned by Future Rogue, and he is eventually killed, but is later revived by Ultir's Arc of Time, specifically Lost Ages. That little glimpse into the future actually saved Gray and helped them win the battle. Now we move on to the Sun Village. So Gray and Natsu both get requested for a job by Warren, a wizard saint and a former member of Fairy Tail, and they were mainly picked due to their performance in the Grand Magic Games. Also, as a side thing, this is one of the few times that both Gray and Natsu stand up to Urza and they punch her in the face at the beginning of this arc, which doesn't actually end out very well for the two of them. So the team does eventually get transported to the Sun Village by Warren. So Gray ends up fighting Dorothée and is turned into a kid. Gray does eventually creatively defeat him, but with him defeated, he gets warned that the gates of the underworld or hell are opening. The final major thing that Gray does during this arc is he figures out how to unfreeze the ice of the whole Sun Village. Moving on to Tartaros. Besides Galuna Island, I would say this arc is probably the biggest arc for Gray as well. Gray and Juvia do get tasked with protecting a Magic Council member, but by the time they get there, that guy is dead, and it's got Juvia all worried, so Gray comforts her. So after being saved by Kana from the guild's destruction, Gray joins the battle against Tartaros, with Gray fighting Keys before being trapped by Alegria. After being saved by Lucy, Gray joins up with Gajeel, Natsu, Juvia, and Lucy to continue fighting. Pretty much as they start fighting, Gray gets taken away by Silver, and this is the beginning of the Gray versus Silver fight. So Silver is Gray's dad. At first, it's not really portrayed like it's his actual dad. Gray is just thinking it's someone impersonating his dad or took over his body. But Silver starts this whole thing off by pretending to be Deliora and having Gray conquer his nightmares by defeating him, so that Silver can finally rest in peace and be with Gray's mom in the afterlife. So during this whole fight, you do eventually get it revealed that Silver is Gray's dad, and that he was brought back to life by Keys, and that he was really trying to have Gray conquer his nightmares by, defeating him by pretending he was Deliora when he actually is still his dad, to have Gray finally move past that portion in his life. So with Silver defeated, he gifts Gray Ice Devil Slayer magic and gives him the mission to kill END. Now this is where you get a bit of a different path. In the anime, Gray just kind of goes straight to fighting Margir. In the manga, Gray gets to test out his power a little bit, and he's the one that actually defeats Tempester instead of Loxus, and he one-shots Tempester using his brand new Ice Devil Slayer magic. And again, that is only in the manga, but in the anime, it was Loxus that defeated Tempester. So Gray eventually teams up with Natsu to defeat Margir and take the Book of END, which the two do succeed in the battle, and they do eventually defeat Margir, which after the battle, Natsu and Gray have a fight over the book on whether to destroy it or keep it, and during their scuffle, it just eventually gets stolen by Zareth, which Gray ends this arc on a pretty sad note for him, because he breaks down crying to Juvia and thanks her very much that she freed his dad, and he ends up living with Juvia for a little while before Avatar. So going into a time skip again, we move into Avatar, which we start off this arc not knowing where Gray is. We find out where Gray is due to Future Rogue's prediction of the future, and they find out that Gray is a member of a dark guild named Avatar, which he stays pretty committed to it right at the beginning because Gray mocks being in Fairy Tail. That mocking causes Lucy to slap him, which eventually later on he does apologize for. But Gray saves Natsu, Lucy, and Happy and reveals that he was secretly a spy and he was sent by Urza, and he's not actually a Dark Guild member, he's still a Fairy Tail member. So the group along with Urza go to stop Operation Purification. Gray ends up battling a Avatar member named Briar, which he does defeat her with the help of Juvia. Him and Juvia eventually tag team for the rest of the operation and stop Operation Purification. With Operation Purification stopped, the guild celebrates its reformation. Moving on to the final arc, the Alvarez Empire, or the Spriggan 12. So Gray is part of the team that goes to go save Makarov, and on Kariko Island, the team runs into Brandish and just realizes how kind of outclassed they are, which the team does eventually save Makarov from Zareth, and Gray and Lucy help defend them on their escape, with Agiel attacking them and Gray and Lucy defending them. So you actually get some nice character building moments before the war actually begins, with Gray Gray thanking Juvia for like all that she does for him and promising her that he'll give her an answer to whether he like loves her or not after the war. So Gray is part of the team that helps defend the western side of town, which he does eventually get moved over to the south to help defend from Alvarez. So while on the southern front, Gray, Juvia, and Leon and Meldy are all fighting together, and Nineheart brings back Ur, Zancro, and Keys, and Leon and Gray together take down Ur, even though it's not actually like Ur, it's just like him recreating a version of Ur, but it's a very cool takedown that Gray and Leon do to take down Ur. So after Universe 1, the whole guild is ready to take back the guild hall from Alvarez, and Gray's part of that team that starts to storm it. This leads into a major battle, which Gray fights Invil, which later Juvia joins the fight, which Invil placed both of them in ice lock, and him and Juvia both kill themselves, but Juvia uses a blood transfusion spell to save Gray, causing Gray to be absolutely furious that this guy killed Juvia, and he chases after Invil, which eventually he does find him, and he defeats him. Invil is the one that reveals to Gray that Natsu is END. This leads into Gray and Natsu fighting, which is eventually stopped by Urza, and they just both forget about it then. So with Magnolia back to normal from Universe 1, Gray's the first person to find Zareth, and he prepares to do Lost Iced Shell, which that ability I will go into in the abilities section. But again, he gets talked out of it by Natsu and Ur. As the final major actions that Gray does in the story before a little bit of a time skip, Gray joins up with Lucy and they protect and rewrite the Book of END. That would be like the end of all the stuff that Gray does during the Alvarez and the Spriggan 12. Now you go into a little bit of a time skip. Gray ends the story with him confessing his love to Juvia and him joining the 100-year quest with Team Natsu, and that is the end of all that Gray does in Fairy Tail, and that is the end of like the backstory section for Gray within Fairy Tail. Obviously his story continues onward if you go into 100-year quest. Going into teams that Gray has been part of. So the first team he was in before he was mainly in Team Natsu was just Gray and Loki, which you hear them talk about like their previous team before, he was part of Team Natsu a few times throughout the story. And then obviously the main team up between those two happened during Tenril Island. And the main reason why those two teamed up was because of their previous work together, which the two seem to get along quite nicely together. They seem to have really good teamwork between each other. And to be honest, it's a really random combo, but I kind of love the two as a pair, like as a fighting pair or whatever, because I really like their combos together when they were on like Tenro. So I would really have liked to see what they were like before Gray joined Team Natsu, like what kind of missions they went on. But yeah, overall their relationship, they seem to be good friends. They seem to have a really nice like combo team. The main team that Gray is part of is, Team Natsu, Team Fairy Tail, whatever you want to call it, which mainly consists of Gray, Natsu, Lucy, Urza, Happy, Wendy, Carla, and occasionally Juvia will pop in and maybe Gashiel. So Gray and Natsu, obviously rivals, but by the end of the story, they are friends. They don't want to admit it really too much, but they are really good friends. Gray with Lucy, you can tell like Gray cares quite a bit about Lucy, like when he was in Avatar and saying crap about Fairy Tail, and he knew that would upset Lucy, and he explicitly stated that, like, he's sorry for that. So he knows, like, how much she cares about him and the rest of the guild. And, they are really good friends and stuff, which most of the time when he gets, like, yelled at for, like, stripping, it's by, like, Lucy or, like, Mira. But, like, honestly, towards, like, the end, like, Lucy and, like, all of them, they don't even freaking care anymore. They're just like, yeah, it's just a naked guy in the corner. But yeah, I think Gray and Lucy, they are good friends and stuff, and you can tell there's moments where he really is like caring for her and stuff. Now Gray with Urza, most of the time he's deadly afraid of her, but there's a few times they've actually went on like solo missions. I know there was a few like in the anime, which those were kind of like filler things. Gray cares for Urza even though she terrorizes him in his average life, and I think it's mainly the moment where he I'm going to be nice to this person was like when he saw Urza crying by the river. That's kind of like where he was like, oh, I should be nice to her. Gray with Happy. As I'm thinking about it, I'm like, is there really that many interactions with him and Happy? Yeah, there's a few times they talk, or he doesn't really get carried away with Happy because, Happy's usually with Natsu and stuff. So Gray with Wendy, Wendy with the rest of the guild and stuff. She's like their little sister and stuff. So, he cares for her. And, they pretty much everyone on the team has like a really nice, cutesy relationship with Wendy. And I'd say that goes for the same thing with Carla. So Gray and Juvia as a team. Obviously, Juvia loves Gray very, very much. There's been quite a few times they've tag teamed throughout the series, and by the end, he does eventually confess that he loves her. One of the few people in the series that is actually confirmed to be a couple, and they are actually a really strong combo because they've been shown to do unison raids quite a few times. Always said to be very incredibly difficult to pull off. Either one of them, they would literally die for each other, as shown with the fight with Invel. They would literally kill themselves before hurting each other. The Disciples now, which is the team of Gray and Leon, which this team up was mainly showed off during the Ratio and Sace arc with him and Leon fighting Racer. Their battle with Racer really did show how good of like a teamwork they had, setting Gray up to take out Racer. And to be honest, I really like this team with the Disciples fighting together. It's quite cool. It does show up again in the Alvarez arc, but it's mainly showcased in the Ratio and Sace arc. Even in the Grand Magic games, like Gray and Leon's relationship, like they're fighting over Juvia, stupid contests, and like trying to outdo each other, and like I'm the better student. Which of the two, I love them as little rivals and stuff. It's really good. Moving into Gray's moveset. The main magic that Gray uses is Ice Maker magic. But before we even get into the magic itself, I just want to kind of go into some base things that Gray can do even before he has any magic whatsoever. Main thing is being resistant to cold. Now, there's a few times where he's been shown to actually be very cold, but he most of the time will actually like complete winter, everything's frozen around him, you'd be like shirtless. Now getting into the actual Ice Make magic itself, Ice Maker magic, there's many different kinds of it. So the people that use this magic, you can have many different styles of it. For Gray in particular, he can make weapons and like static objects. For example, like he can make a sword, or like for like Edalus, he made a copy of a key. But then you look at like an Ice Make wizard like Leon, and he makes animals. So for each Ice Make wizard, they can kind of make their Ice Make magic will be vastly different from each other. Each one's going to have a different style. Now, before you even get into any ability whatsoever, his Ice Make magic can freeze like water. It's been shown at times to freeze flames and like other forms of magic. So getting into the actual named abilities from Gray, I'm going to go through all the named abilities first before you get into like special ability ones like Ice Devil Slayer and like Gray's Blood Ice magic. The first named ability being Ice Make Lance. So Gray will make curved ice lances, and you'll shoot them towards his enemy. They kind of look like little arrows and stuff. They'll shoot towards the target. This goes over quite a distance. Hopefully, if you hit the target, you'll like impale them with the arrow. Then you have a subset of this, which is Ice Make Freeze Lancer. The Ice Make Lance, but the ice lances are a lot longer and they'll hit their enemy with more force. Ice Make Wall. He'll make a wall of ice straight in front of him, and it'll hopefully block whatever magic attack is coming his way. This is also a different version of the Ice Make Wall, but you have the Ice Make Shield. This is a very good defensive one that he uses quite a lot. So Gray will make a giant shield in front of him, and it kind of resembles a flower. Ice Make Hammer. So Gray will create a giant ice hammer that will float above his opponent, and he'll like drop it on him with force, which he also has a subset of this one, which he has a few subsets of the Ice Make Hammer, which he has the Ice Make Ice Hammer, which is the Ice Make Hammer, but it's got giant spikes on it, so when it hits the enemy, it's got more of an impact to it. The Ice Make Ice Impact, which is a more like designed hammer. It's a hammer that Gray makes. It has more of a design to it, but when it hits the target, it's got a bigger impact. Ice Make Floor. So Gray will literally just freeze the floor, and for most people, they'll just start sliding around, won't have their footing, while Gray can just slide around and like hit you no problem. Ice Make Super Freeze Arrow. This is the bow and arrow that Gray used to defeat Racer. So it's essentially a bow and arrow that he can shoot, and that arrow goes insanely fast and very, very far. If it hits you, it could pretty much kill you in one shot. Ice Make Battle Axe. So Gray will create an axe out of ice for melee combat, and he can, swing it around him. Ice Make Sword, which Gray will make a sword out of ice, and the sword is actually pretty durable. It's been shown to, cut and parry other weapons, even if they're made out of metal. Ice Make Cold Excalibur. So Gray will create a massive sword, and he'll use it to attack his opponent, and it's been shown to cause quite a bit of damage. Ice Make Icebringer. So Gray will make 2 ice swords, and he'll move forward and in like an X motion, it'll slash his opponent. Ice Make Ice Geyser. So kind of similar to the Ice Make Floor, but instead of it being a flat ice surface on the ground, he puts spikes on the ground, which for anyone standing on the ice, they're trying to run away and they're on ice, but then the spikes will stab them through the floor. It's a pretty good way to make an area where people do not want to stand because they'll get stabbed. Ice Make Prison, which Gray will make a cage out of ice, which can be used to trap people. Ice Make Clone, which Gray will create a identical copy of himself out of ice, which this was mainly used during his fight with Silver because he just used a bunch of ice clones to make Silver think he was attacking him, which gave him time to do other things to defeat Silver. Ice Blade 7 Slice Dance. So Gray will create ice blades on the back of his forearms, and he'll start like slashing his enemy several times, which this move has been shown to do quite a lot of damage, and he mainly kind of uses it as a finisher. It's a really good way to take down someone really fast. Ice Make Stairs. Gray will literally just make stairs out of ice. It's been used quite a few times to get them to places they need to be. Ice Make Slide, which is kind of like the opposite of the stairs. It gets them down from where they need to be, or makes it so Gray can like slide to a place a lot faster. But yeah, he'll literally make a slide out of ice and, slide down it to get wherever he needs to be. Ice Make Rampart. Pretty similar to the Ice Make Shield, except he makes an extremely massive wall, and it can be used to stop opponents or attacks. This is the attack he used to stop Racer. Ice Make Grappling Hook. So Gray will make a grappling hook out of ice, and it can be used to get himself to higher places. Ice Make Death Scythe. So Gray will make a large scythe out of ice, and he'll like jump up and like swing it down at you. Ice Make Key, which this was what he used during Edalus to make an exact copy of a key. Ice Make Gungnir. Gray will create a giant lance out of ice, which will trap his opponents inside of it. Ice Make Knuckle. Gray will freeze the ground under his opponent, and then he'll create a giant ice fist and then strike the opponent. Ice Make Saucer. So Gray will create a large spinning ice disc. It kind of looks like a buzzsaw, and it'll like spin it towards his opponent. Ice Make Ice Wall. Another version of the Ice Make Geyser, but instead of like stabbing them, it will freeze the opponent instead of like stabbing them. Ice Make Cocoon, which Gray will surround his body with a cocoon of ice, which will have spikes on it. Preferably will protect him from like attacks if someone's trying to like stab him or whatever, because then if they go try and stab him, there's a bunch of like spikes on this ice and they'll probably stab themselves. Ice Make Kite. Gray will make a kite which will allow him to like fly in the air. Ice Make Unlimited One-Sided Chaotic Dance, which this is the attack he used against Rufus, but he basically essentially tried to make as many large swords, blades, all at once to just completely overwhelm his enemy, which he can use this to attack, obviously more than just one enemy. Ice Make Thieving Hand. So Gray will make a copy of a human hand out of ice, and it'll like allow him to like pickpocket people or steal items. Ice Make Platform. Gray can make a platform out of ice so they can just like stay on a stable surface. Just need a platform to stand on, and he can make more than one at a time. Ice Make Cannon, which Gray will just make a cannon out of ice where he can use his ice as a projectile, or he could use like other things like an actual cannonball as a projectile. Ice Make Ice Cannon, which is another version of it, which Gray will create like a rocket launcher that he can hold in his hands to actually shoot like an ice projectile, or again, a real projectile. Ice Make Vambrace. Gray will make a gauntlet around his arm, which he can use to throw objects, which will dramatically enhance their strength and speed. He used it to throw a cannonball at Silver, which killed him. Ice Make Wheel, which Gray used to fix a wheel. Iced Shell. Gray has tried to use this many a times, but has always been talked out by Natsu, and allows the user to forfeit their life, but it'll encase a shell of ice around a target that cannot be unfrozen unless if you use Moon Drip. So that person will be completely encased in ice and will probably die, but you also kill yourself in the process. The alternate version of this is the Lost Ice Shell, which is essentially kind of the same thing, as Ice Shell, except when you cast it, any memory of you will be forgotten by anyone that even had a memory of you. So it's like you never even existed. So going into special forms, you have the Blood Ice Make Magic, Gray's own blood that he used to just use his regular Ice Make Magic, which was used to defeat Ultir. Then you have the main one that Gray is known for, which is Ice Devil Slayer Magic. Since he's gotten Ice Devil Slayer Magic by base, it will allow him to do these things before you even cast a spell. It'll let him actually consume ice, similar to like Natsu eating fire, but Gray can do that with ice. So if he actually consumes another person's ice, it will replenish his strength and enhance his power, and it gives him even more immunity to ice. So getting into actual named abilities for Ice Devil Slayer Magic, Ice Make Silver, which is summoning his Ice Devil Slayer magic, and it will just be used to completely freeze an area like in an instant. Ice Devil's Rage. So Gray will make a beam of ice out of his mouth, very similar to like Natsu's Fire Dragon Roar. Ice Devil's Zero Longsword. So Gray will create a longsword from the palm of his hands and use it to slash his opponents. This sword cuts very, very deep and is pretty darn damaging to a person, and it also has an added effect of if it hits you and stuff, it can freeze you solid. Ice Devil's Zeroth Destruction Bow. So Gray will create a bow and arrow similar to just the regular one he makes in his Ice Make form. This one uses Devil Slayer magic. The bow, when he shoots it, shoots out at a very, very fast speed, and when it hits the target, it has an added effect of it'll start to spike out, heavily damage the person that it makes contact with. Ice Devil's Zeroth Destruction Fist. So Gray will make like gauntlets that he can use to like punch a target and add even more damage to it. And that's pretty much the end of the modes and stuff, but he has been shown to do like unison raids with Juvia, so I thought I'd include that as well. Otherwise, that's been the backstory of the teams and the movesets for Gray Fullbuster. Overall, I really like Gray. He's a really cool, calm, collected person. His personality is really chill, and if you actually make him mad, you knew you really messed with him. I just love all the like little quirks with him, like his stripping habits, just kind of funny. And I just like how he's very tactical with a lot of his fights and stuff. But overall, leave your comments about Gray in the comments, what you think of him. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and this is Drago, signing out.